there that we will steal from you. I particularly like the idea of using children as a mode of communication to the wider public. We don't have time for questions at this point, so you'll just have to contact the speakers at the end of the event. And I'd now like to welcome Professor Axel Goodbody onto the stage to give us a cultural perspective on community energy. So I'd like you to welcome Dr. Axel Goodbody.
Right. Well, thank you very much for the invitation to speak here, and particularly to Jean Bolton, who has encouraged me to think about the underlying reasons, historical and cultural, for the differences in attitudes towards renewable energy and perhaps also community energy. So I should start by saying that what I'm going to say now is not based on any empirical research. It is just some ideas, some arguments for you to think about. Doesn't look good. Okay. Yes, my starting point is the fact that the UK lags far behind Germany, Austria, and Denmark, probably some other European countries, in community energy. In terms of the percentage of energy consumed, and generated renewably, and in terms of the percentage of renewable energy which is generated in community-owned schemes. Germany has over 600 cooperatives, Britain has about 50. Some of you may have more accurate figures than that. This is due to, of course, quite concrete things, like the way the energy market is organized in different countries. It's due to differences in national legislation. It's due to institutional obstacles. In Germany, for instance, communities have had favorable feed-in tariffs, particularly as we saw in that chart around 2011 for wind energy and other renewables, photovoltaic. Germany has had the right to access German producers have had the right to access the energy they produced at wholesale price, and the right to control distribution and grid management locally. These things are not in the UK. But what I'm going to talk about is a further factor determining the success of renewable energy cooperatives, that is, societal norms, expectations, and values. There are significant differences between the cultures of local energy activism and the attitudes towards the cooperative model in the different countries in Europe. I'm going to be focusing mainly on Germany, the only country I really know anything about. These derive, I'm going to argue, from historical experience and from cultural traditions. So I think the cultural traditions arise out of historical experience. So, two general principles. The acceptability of local renewable energy initiatives is, I am arguing, this is not proven, but it's my theory, by the scale of the proposed plants and by their ownership. These are two factors governing the underlying attitudes towards local energy. Large plants, even if they are renewable, even if they're wind farms or solar PV installations, tend to alienate the local population. The extent of community ownership of the plant also affects the degree of local support. As they say in Denmark, your own pigs don't stink. This certainly seems to apply to wind power. So in 2004 in the UK, 98% of capacity of wind power installation was owned by large corporations and utilities. In Germany, it was 55%, and in Denmark, a mere 12%. This may say something about the reasons why there's so much more in the last two countries. Farmers only owned 1% of wind power in the UK, but 63% in Denmark. So it seems possible, at least plausible, that cooperative ownership at least partly accounts for the difference in the success of local renewable energy schemes in Germany and in Denmark. And here is the table there, utilities, 98% owning wind power, onshore wind power in the UK, whereas in Denmark 12. And if you look at the bottom line, co-ops 0.4 in the UK, whereas in Denmark 25%. I'll come back to that. So attitudes towards renewable energy, centralization of power supply, which favors large power plants, and shared ownership in cooperatives vary from one country to another. And these attitudes depend on historical experience and its legacy in social values and cultural traditions. So Germany is going to be my main example, followed by a briefer comment on Denmark. Community energy in Germany. My first argument is that the support for renewable energy derives from self-image of the German people as a people close to nature. I'm pushing this a little bit because, of course, we have a self-image in the UK of being close to nature. We've got Robin Hood to think of and so on. But one of the earliest descriptions of the German people was by Tacitus in the 1st century AD in De Germania. He described the German tribes as leading a simple natural life. Germany has also had a powerful romantic movement. Another factor is the late rapid industrialization in the last third of the 19th century, which left a legacy of a polarization between supporters of large technological projects and progress and opponents who are stressing the cost. And after the Second World War, nationalism in Germany was discredited through its association with fascism. When pride in the nation began to revive in the 1970s, it was associated with the country's record on environmental concern. Just going through those points very briefly, I'm going to zip through here because of time reasons. This is one of the manuscripts of Tacitus's De Germania and an early map of Germany, not very accurate map of Germany. Here we have something about the significance of nature in German cultural tradition, both the classics, Goethe and Schiller there. On the right, the statue in front of, in Weimar, and quotations from Goethe and Schiller, and the opening stanza of a poem by one of the great German romantics, Joseph von Eichendorff, all about forests and woods and loving nature. So there's that argument about the national identity. The second argument was about German regionalism. There are strong regional and local identities in Germany. We have them, of course, in Britain, and other countries have them, France as well, but they are perhaps particularly strong in Germany because of the very late unification of the country. And that has led to a correspondingly strong pride in the city and the region, especially in Bavaria and perhaps also in Baden-Württemberg, which is the stronghold of green thinking. Baden-Württemberg also the scene of key anti-nuclear struggles in the 1970s, where a nuclear power station was to be built, but it was actually not built, the first success of the anti-nuclear demonstrations. The most striking difference between German attitudes towards energy and British ones is, of course, the attitude towards nuclear power. Here we have some pictures of the Wühl Friendship House, where there was a cultural center, and we've got Walter Mossmann singing his ballads. green ballads. So nuclear power is the touchstone of environmentalism in Germany since the 1970s, in a way which is not true of the UK. The environmental movement was dominated for its first decade in Germany by anti-nuclear action. Fears of the hazards of nuclear technology revived periodically by Chernobyl and Fukushima more recently. In both Germany and the Netherlands, the strength of the anti-nuclear movement has undoubtedly contributed to the high level of interest in alternative energy. And anti-nuclear feeling in Germany is bound up with concern over monopolies as well. These are differences to the UK, where just down the road in Hinkley, they're going to build a new nuclear power station, out of sight, out of mind. Nobody's particularly worried about it here, much more concerned about building ugly wind turbines. Something to do with the fact, perhaps, that protecting green belts and landscapes has been played an important role in the environmental movement and culture in this country. Whereas in Germany, anti-nuclear feeling is much stronger. We also have a much more open mind in this country about large companies dominating than perhaps in Germany. And this is linked with Germany's decentralized structures and tradition of municipal autonomy. So here are just some pictures of the anti-nuclear protest in Germany, which I'll zip through. And a particular dimension of this is the association of nuclear power with fascism. Robert Jung was an anti-fascist, Jewish origin, an Austrian who became a leader of the anti-nuclear movement, and this book of his is arguing that Germany would become an atomic state, that is like a police state, if a lot of new nuclear power stations were built. I think it's been proved wrong, but at the time, in 1977, when he was writing this, environmentalists were having their phones tapped and there was surveillance and so on, because they were associated with the terrorist movement, which came to a head around 76, 77. So there were reasons at the time. Yes. Second half of the 70s, fear nuclear power stations would turn the country into a police state. Yes, Jung personified as a Jew who'd been in the resistance, link between anti-fascism and the anti-nuclear movement. We don't have that in the UK. France, I know very little about, and a colleague who knows much more than me suggested that I could introduce France as being the mirror image of Germany. This is, of course, a nuclear power station. Highly centralized nation, like Britain, highly centralized, as opposed to Germany with its strong regional autonomy. With a highly centralized energy system and grid system like we have in the UK, dominated by large conglomerates like EDF and so on, and heavily into nuclear power. I'm very glad to say we've had the opposite presented just now, so that is not the whole story of France by any means. In Poland, also, I think, highly centralized in terms of the grid and energy generation, 4 big energy companies dominating the market, 90% of electricity generated from coal. However, obviously, there are lots of initiatives in Poland. In Denmark, I've got a picture here of Tvin, which I can remember having a poster on my wall when I was in my 20s of this wind turbine in Tvin, which was started in 1975. Denmark has a long tradition of interest in wind turbines and renewables, and particularly strong is the tradition of community renewable energy in Denmark, owned by co-ops. And there is a historical reason for this. There's an organizational tradition going back to agricultural cooperatives formed in the 1880s. This was the legacy of Nikolai Grundtvig and the Danish high school movement. These high schools were residential schools where farmers' sons would come and live for half a year or something like that, and learn all sorts of things about agricultural practices. but also they received general education and sort of civic education. So community energy in Denmark, this is my final point really, has benefited from this long tradition of cooperative production and marketing, which goes back to the dairies and slaughterhouses and so on, which the farmers' cooperatives built in the 1880s. Yeah, that's all. The next one is somebody else's.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. That was a really interesting step back from the numbers to look at our own various cultures and how that influences our energy policies. Of course, all of this is not possible without finance. So I'd now like to welcome Jan Willem Bode. Hi, Jan. Onto the stage. I think he's been advising the Froome Renewable Energy Company and runs Mongoose Energy. So I'm now going to hand over to Jan Willem.